all remember that we have different levels of organization, right? And the smallest is the chemical, then one level higher is the cellular level of organization. So cellular level deals with the cells and the organs. So today, now we'll talk about the cells. First, we'll see how to define a cell. First, the definition of a cell. Okay? Then we'll see the parts of a typical cell. What are the parts of a cell? Then we'll talk about the cell membrane. Cell membrane is the outer boundary of the cell. And we will see the structure and function of the cell membrane. In the cell membrane, you have proteins, and those proteins of your cell membrane perform a number of important functions. So we'll see what are the proteins of the cell membrane and what are their functions. Okay? Another thing we'll talk about is the intercellular junctions or cell junctions. You know, in different types of tissues, the cells are present in different ways. For example, in connective tissues, you'll see the cells are away from each other. You have matrix. If you see the epithelial tissue, you'll see the cells are always attached to each other. So how the cells are attached to each other? By the intercellular or cellular joinings or junctions. So these are the junctions, okay, that hold the cells, adjacent cells, together. So we'll see what are the important cell junctions are present in the cells. Then we'll talk about the transport across the cell membrane. You know, cell membrane is a semi-permeable membrane. So it will allow some chemicals to pass through it. But not all the chemicals will be able to pass through it. That's why it is called what? Semi-permeable. Not completely permeable, right? Partially permeable. Why? Because it will allow some chemicals to pass through, but will block others. So, transport occurs across the cell membrane. So, we'll see the processes of transport across the cell membrane. How the molecules pass through the cell membrane. Then, the last thing we will see the response of a living cell. If you take a red blood cell, for example, from your body and put in the solution, 3 different solutions that have 3 different concentrations, how the cell, living cell, will respond in those environments. So we'll talk about that. The response of a cell in isotonic, hypotonic, and hypertonic solutions. Okay. First, the definition of a cell. The cell is the smallest structural and functional unit of a living organism or living body. Smallest structural and functional unit. That means a cell is the smallest structure that can stay alive and perform its function individually. Example, if I take a cell out from your body and put in a dish, petri dish, and give nutrients and oxygen, I will be able to keep the cell alive. Do you know that? The scientists, they do all the time. Take the cells out to do the research and put in a petri dish, give nutrients and oxygen and keep the cell alive. That means what? We can keep a cell, a single cell can stay alive and perform its function. Make sense? So that's the smallest structure that can stay alive and perform its function. Another example, bacteria, amoeba, right? Those are single cell microorganisms. They stay alive and perform their function. Now, if you break the cell membrane, then it will die. Okay, so that is the smallest unit. Human body consists of 50 to 100 trillion cells. Remember, not million, not billion, trillion. So, huge number of cells. Those cells are present in more than 200 different forms, different types. So, our body cells are different in shape, size, color, function. Okay? More than 200 different types of cells we have in our body. All cells are mainly formed by carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. You remember in last class I said that 4 elements form 96% of body mass. You remember? These are the 4 elements, right? So they form the cells of the body, and our body is formed by the cells. This picture is showing how the cells could be different from each other. We have more than 200 different types of cells. Here they have shown few of them, right? So if you see the top left one, that is those 2 cells are fibroblasts. You see 2 fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are connective tissue cells. They produce fibers, connective tissue fibers. That's why you see fibers around those 2 cells. Top right, those 2 round cells are red blood cells or erythrocytes. They are flat, round, red colored cells. So their color is red. They are flat, round, like discs, round discs. So you see, they are different. And fibroblasts in terms of their shape, right, color, and function. Red blood cells transport oxygen. Then below those 2, you see the epithelial cells. Those are cuboidal epithelial cells. Cubical shape, cube-shaped epithelial cells. You see 5 cuboidal epithelial cells there. So they are different in shape and size and also function. Epithelial cells line the body surfaces. Below that, you see 2 types of muscle cells. This one is a skeletal muscle cell. You see very long and many nuclei inside. This is a smooth muscle cell. It is small and has a single nucleus. Only one nucleus in the smooth muscle cell, and it is small. Skeletal muscle cell is very big, long, and many nuclei. So you see even one muscle cell is different in terms of size and shape from another type of muscle. Now if you go bottom, all the way bottom, and see the left one, that's a fat cell. You see, in a fat cell, the nucleus is not in the center. It is attached to the side, attached to the membrane. So it is different. Bottom right is a macrophage. Macrophages do phagocytosis, engulf the microorganisms or antigens, right? So macrophages do what? Engulf the antigens or microorganisms. Phagocytosis. So that's why they need many extensions. So you see the processes sticks out from the cell membrane and that help the eating or engulfing the microorganisms. Top right is a nerve cell or a neuron. It transmits electrical signal and you see it has a cell body and a number of processes, short and long processes. So looks different and performs different function, electrical impulse transmission, electricity. The bottom right is a sperm, sex cell. Sperm looks funny. It looks like a baby fish, right? It has a head, body or midpiece, and a long tail. Why it needs a tail? Because you know that sperm swim, right? And go to find the egg to fertilize it, right? So it travels. So that's why it needs the tail. So you see some cells, how they are different in shape, size, color, and function. Now we'll see the parts of a typical cell. If you see a human cell, it has three parts. Outer boundary is the plasma membrane or cell membrane, and in the center you have a nucleus, and in between the nucleus and the cell membrane or plasma membrane you have the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is the fluid in between the plasma membrane and the nucleus. And in the cytoplasm, in that fluid, you will find some organelles. Organelles are present in two types of organelles are present in the cytoplasm, membranous and non-membranous organelles. So in the cytoplasm, you have two types of organelles, membranous organelles and non-membranous organelles. Membranous organelles have outer covering or membrane. Non-membranous don't have outer membranous covering. So those are the parts of a typical cell. Organelles perform specific functions. So specific organelle performs specific function. And cell membrane gives the boundary, and nucleus is called the control center. Nucleus contains DNA, and nucleus is called the control center of the cell. It controls the cellular functions. This is a picture of a typical cell. Remember, when you see the pictures in your book, in the textbook, most of the pictures are beautifully drawn, right? With all different colors. But in real, if you see the real cell, it will not be colorful. Keep that in mind. When you see under the electron microscope, it will not be colored. In books, you can color all different colors you can use. Just they use the color to make it clear to you, understandable, but that can be sometime, it can be far from the reality. That's why it's always nice if you put the real one, right? Picture of a real thing and the color one side by side. Okay, this is a nice picture. You see all different parts. First, the plasma membrane or cell membrane is the outer boundary. So this is the plasma membrane. This is the nucleus. In between, you have the cytoplasm. In the cytoplasm, you have different organs. Okay. Now, first, we'll see the nucleus. In your high school, and intro bio. I'm sure you have learned a lot about the cell, right? So in anatomy physiology, this is more higher level. So I'm not going into detail of the cell, just briefly. That will probably, be a good revision for you. So few things. Nucleus. Nucleus is the control center. That is number one. It controls the functions of the cell, right? It controls the functions of the cell. Number two, nucleus transmits hereditary information from the parents to the offspring. You know that, right? Hereditary information will go from the parents to the offsprings, because nucleus has what? DNA. That will transmit the hereditary information. So those are two very important functions of the nucleus. Nucleus has 4 different structures. So nucleus has how many different structures? 4. One is called the nuclear envelope. Or nuclear membrane, same thing, outer covering. Number 2, chromatin. Number 3, nucleoli, or nucleoli, both are correct. And number 4, nucleoplasm, the fluid. Okay, so these are 4 structures in the nucleus: nuclear envelope or membrane, chromatin, nucleoli, and nucleoplasm. In this picture, you will see what they have shown here. You see the nuclear envelope, the outer covering. Then this part is called the chromatin, and this is the nucleolus. Okay. Nucleoli is plural, and this is not right. Nucleolus. There's one nucleolus, okay, in the center, that blue round structure. And the fluid inside, we have fluid, that is the nucleoplasm, that we will show here. Okay, so those are, remember, 4 parts, okay. And so you know the 2 important functions of the nucleus, right? One is it controls the cellular functions of the cell. Number 2, hereditary information is transmitted. And it has 4 parts. That's all. Now, if you see the organelles in the cytoplasm around the nucleus, these blue structures are endoplasmic reticulum. Endoplasmic reticulum, or ER, consists of many tube-like structures connected to each other. So around the nucleus, many tube-like structures, they are connected to each other, and that is the endoplasmic reticulum. Now, endoplasmic reticulum has 2 parts: rough endoplasmic reticulum and smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Why one part is called the rough, another part is called the smooth? Because if you see, ribosomes. If you see this part, this is the rough endoplasmic reticulum, also called rough surface endoplasmic reticulum, because the surface is rough. Why? Because of the attachment of ribosomes. These tiny structures are the ribosomes, and they stay attached to the wall of the outer surface of the endoplasmic reticulum. That part is the rough or rough surfaced endoplasmic reticulum. And the other part, you see, is smooth, because no ribosomes are attached there. Okay? These 2 parts perform 2 different types of functions. Their functions are different. So first, we'll see the function of the ribosomes. Ribosomes produce or manufacture proteins. So protein synthesis or manufacturing or production is the function of the ribosomes. Very important function. Smooth, rough endoplasmic reticulum receives the proteins from the ribosomes. So you see, that's why ribosomes are just attached to the rough endoplasmic reticulum. The ribosomes will produce or manufacture the proteins and will send to the endoplasmic reticulum. Will send them to the inside the endoplasmic reticulum. So rough endoplasmic reticulum will do what? Will receive the protein from the ribosomes and will assemble them okay, modify them. So assembling and modification of proteins. And then after doing these two things, rough endoplasmic reticulum will do what? Transport those proteins to the Golgi apparatus. Transport proteins to Golgi apparatus, another organelle. Okay, Golgi apparatus. So these are the functions of your rough endoplasmic reticulum. Will receive the protein from the ribosomes, will assemble them, modify them, and send them to the Golgi apparatus. Smooth endoplasmic reticulum performs different functions. Smooth endoplasmic reticulum or ER performs different functions. One is lipid synthesis. Number two, detoxification. Of chemicals. Number three, storage of calcium. Storage of calcium. So these are three important functions of smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Lipid synthesis, detoxification. You know that metabolism produces harmful chemicals, right? Toxic chemicals in our body. Do you know that? You remember that? Metabolism produces harmful toxic chemicals. So many of those toxic chemicals will be detoxified inside the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, will be converted to harmless chemicals. When you take medicine or drug, the medicines have good and bad components, right? Medicines have also toxic components. Those will be detoxified inside the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, will be neutralized, and calcium storage. Okay, so those are the functions. Now, Golgi apparatus. Golgi apparatus. You see here, rough ER transport proteins to Golgi apparatus. And Golgi apparatus will receive that protein from rough endoplasmic reticulum and will do what? Packaging. Packaging proteins. Okay? Packaging the proteins is the function of Golgi apparatus. So you see here three things. If I ask you, ribosomes do what? Ribosomes this side
Produce proteins.
produce what?
Proteins.
Proteins. Manufacture, right? And rough endoplasmic reticulum will do what?
Receives them and then
Assemble them, right? Assemble them. Modify them. And Golgi apparatus and transport. And Golgi apparatus will do what?
packages.
Package them. So when you go to a factory, what you see? If you go to a factory, you see different sections, right? One section does what? Manufactures, right? Another section process, right? Assembly. And another section does what? Package them. Okay? Sent to the stores. Right? So those are the functions of those important organelles. Another important organelle is the mitochondria. You need to know that. Mitochondria is called the powerhouse. Powerhouse. Why? Mitochondria produces most of the ATPs in our body. Most of the ATP come from mitochondria, or produced inside the mitochondria. That's why mitochondria is called the powerhouse of the cell. The last thing here, in the cytoplasm, you will see many tube-like or rod-like structures. Tube-like and rod-like filaments. So those are called cytoskeleton. Cyto means cell, skeleton is the framework. They are microtubules and microfilaments. Okay? So microtubules and microfilaments. Microtubules are microscopic tube-like structures. Microfilaments are rod-like structures. Those together give the skeleton of the cell, support the cell, and that's why they are called cytoskeleton. Okay? So cytoskeleton is formed by the microtubules and microfilaments. Tubules are tube-like, so if you see the microtubules, they have channels or openings. Filaments are like solid, rod-like, no opening inside. Okay? If the cell doesn't have microtubules, microfilaments, what will happen? The cell will change the shape all the time because no support. The microtubules and microfilaments work like you can tell, like when you go for camping, you take the tent, right? And the poles. Without poles, what will happen? You will not be able to support the tent, right? So microtubules, microfilaments get attached to the cell membrane from different directions and keep the shape of the cell. Otherwise, the cell will get very soft and will change the shape all the time. Make sense? So that's the cytoskeleton. Cell membrane or plasma membrane. Plasma membrane performs a couple of important functions. One is cell membrane or plasma membrane gives the boundary of the cell, giving the boundary. Number two, giving the shape of the cell. Number three, separates inside the cell from the outside. So those are three important functions. Boundary of the cell is formed by plasma membrane, giving the shape of the cell, and number three, separating inside the cell from the outside. That is a very important function. Intercellular from extracellular fluid. uh, the structure of the plasma membrane. Plasma membrane is a phospholipid bilayer. Bi means what? Two. So phospholipids form two layers in which proteins are embedded or inserted. So I am repeating again, plasma membrane is a phospholipid bilayer in which what?
Protein.
Proteins are inserted or embedded. That is the structure in one sentence. That's the structure of the plasma membrane. Okay, you remember when I talked about the main types of fats or lipids in our body, I said what? Triglyceride, phospholipids, and steroids. Do you remember that? So at that time I told you phospholipids form what? The cell membrane, found in the cell membrane. So cell membrane is a phospholipid bilayer in which proteins are inserted. How the proteins are inserted? If you see the cell membrane under very powerful electron microscope, you will see phospholipid bilayer, like whitish phospholipid bilayer, in which the proteins are inserted like stones. So if you see that under the microscope, it will look like a beautiful floor, beautiful white floor, in which you have marbles or stones are placed like this. Make sense? It will look like this under the microscope. So mosaic, mosaic? So like, you have the stones, beautiful colorful stones on the floor. So that's how it looks like under the microscope. Now not only that, those proteins are doing what? Changing their shapes. Changing what? Their shapes. Now you just think that you have a beautiful floor in which there are nice stones, and those stones are changing their shape. So it will look like what? It's moving, right? It is moving. That's why it is called fluid. So that's a model of cell membrane. We say fluid mosaic model to explain the structure of the cell membrane. Now I told you that you have proteins in the cell membrane. Those proteins of the cell membrane perform very important functions. First we'll see the types of proteins. There are two different types of proteins we see: integral proteins and peripheral proteins. If you see the structure of the cell membrane in this picture, first we'll see two things. Phospholipid bilayer. You see this part is the phospholipid part. It has two layers. One layer, okay, the phospholipid bilayer in which proteins are inserted. So these are the proteins. Now you see some proteins are deeply inserted into the phospholipid. For example, you see this one is inserted all the way from one side to other side. This one, although partially inserted, but it's deeply going inside the phospholipid. So these are called the integral proteins. Those are deeply inserted in the phospholipid. Some proteins you see here, this one and this one, they are not going inside the phospholipid. They are just attached to the outside or inside. Loosely attached, not deeply inserted. These are called the peripheral proteins. So two types of proteins: integral proteins and peripheral proteins. They perform some important functions. So we'll just talk about those important functions later. Just know that those proteins perform important functions. Okay, those are the two main structures: phospholipid bilayer and proteins. In addition, you have lipids and glucose present in the cell membrane. You see those green chains, green structures, these are glucose molecules.